Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Welcome to November, everyone. I am filming this on a lovely Saturday morning. I think you guys are seeing this tomorrow morning, so happy Sunday to you. Happy November to you. And yeah, I am here to wrap up my month of October reading. It was so much better than September. I mean, just generally life was so much better in October than in September. I really finally kind of like relaxed and got back in the groove of things, which was good because work has been literal, actual insanity and will continue to be so through the end of the year. So wish me luck on that. But October was also just a month of really good reading. Like I was looking back through my stats. I think I read 29 books, which was a lot. Some of that was me finishing up books that I already had in progress, but also just like I read a lot. Some of that was because I've been re-embracing the whole going between the audiobook and the physical book thing. But anyway, I was looking through my stats. Of those 29, 13 of them were 4 or 4.5 stars. So that's a third of what I read was at least a 4-star book, which a 4-star to me is like B+ A- range. So like that is really, really good. I think that bears out overall in the stats, but all that to say, it was just a very excellent reading month for me. So I have a lot of things that I want to talk to you guys about. So I guess I'll just cut to the chase here. I'll drink some coffee and we will get to getting. Okay, so for my overall stats, like I was saying, I read 29 books in October for a total of 9,802 pages, which was roughly a 50% increase over September, which I think makes sense. And the average page length was 338, which is actually 25% higher than in September. And just generally, that's a pretty high average rating for me. I usually tend to hover much closer to like the 300 mark. So that makes sense because I definitely had some chunky books that I got through. There's that. Of those 29 books, 26 of them came from my TBR, and this is actually my highest month of reducing things from my TBR that I've had so far this year. I think I either read or unhauled 30 books off of my TBR. So that was, on average, the books that I read this month were 19 years old. That was, I think, maybe the best I've done this year because I read 3 classics, so I think that was weighting things down. On average, they had been on my TBR for 11 months, which is a little higher than normal, but still under a year, so that's good. In terms of sources where I got things from, I did get through a lot of ebooks this month, so there was a lot from Amazon on there, which is pretty typical. Any month where I read any number of ebooks, usually that's going to skew my Amazon percent up since I have a Kindle. And then I think 7 of the ones that I read were from the publisher. Oh, and when we get to the challenges, we'll talk about that. So pretty typical mix for me of where I got books from. In terms of my genre, so definitely overall romance was my highest genre this month. Some of that was because I was doing some comfort reading to sort of like get me out of my anxious slump, and also just based on some of the arcs that I had to read. I read 8 contemporary romances, 2 historical romances, and 2 what I would call speculative romances, so either like sci-fi romance or fantasy romance kind of things. But I also read a lot of mystery. That was my second highest category, followed by fantasy, followed by classics, and some form of nonfiction. So pretty typical genre mix there for me. And then when it came to my rating, so like I was saying earlier, very heavily skewed up. I did have 1 DNF, and then I had 4 2.5 stars, 3 3 stars, and 8 3.5 stars, and then everything else was 4 or 4.5. So that was an average rating of 3.43. Very high, which reflects on my overall feelings that October was a very good reading month. And when I went to look through like what I wanted to talk to you guys about, I had like 12 of them marked as hits, and I was like, okay, we're gonna have to pare this down a little bit. So I have a lot I want to talk about. But anyway, in terms of challenges that I addressed this month, so I have been on a real binge mode with the In Death series. I think you guys will soon be seeing a video that was inspired by this binge I've been on, which is my recommendations of series that I have enjoyed binging in my life. But I read 5 of them this month. One of them was one of the worst in the series. I think it was Devoted in Death. I put at like 2.5 stars. I did not like that one. But then also it had one of my favorites in the series, which was Echoes in Death. So I read 5 of those. I read 3 classics for my classics TBR. Good job me. I read Northanger Abbey, I read Dracula, and I read the Moonstone at long last. We will talk about all of these and other categories that are coming up, but that was very exciting. I did not get through David Copperfield, though I did start it. And in typical Dickensian fashion, I like a lot of things about it. I do think it is far too long, but I actually paused it because I'm gonna pick it back up for Tome Topple, which is coming up here in November. So anyway, but I got through 3 classics off my TBR, so that was absolutely great. From my 19 books I want to read in 2019, I did finish 6 of Crows, which I ended up giving, I think, 3.5 stars. I was sort of between 3.5 and 4 stars. I really liked it, and I can very much understand now why it is something people really enjoy, because it has a lot of things I like, which is character-driven fantasy worlds, and a very fun plot that arises from that fantasy world. I will say I think that this book felt like a lot of setup, which is what kept me from like loving it. But I'm wondering if that's why Crooked Kingdom is so beloved, because I'm assuming that all the really interesting setup that happened in this book will get paid off in that one. So I feel like this book teed me up to very much enjoy Crooked Kingdom. So I'm looking forward to getting to that one. But that was what I did in terms of challenges. But I also want to mention that this month I officially finished all of my arcs that I have for 2019. Every single one of them. On NetGalley, I have 0 arcs currently waiting for me because the ones that I have requested don't come out for a while, so they haven't started making whatever. And oh, guys, I'm so excited. I'm just so delighted. I do have 2 physical arcs that I'm still going to be getting to this year, but they're for next year. So it felt like a very big accomplishment to get through all of those things that I had to read. And this now really frees me up for the last 2 months of the year to just read on my challenges that I set for myself to finish up some of those TBRs and then just to mood read. So feeling very good about that. So with all that being said, I think we're going to start with my disappointments because that was my smallest category. And then we'll move on to surprises and hits. So let's get to it. Okay, so I had 3 books that I wanted to mention as disappointments. And 2 of these are not books that I would say are bad books. I gave both of these first 2 3 stars. I think they're good. They just weren't quite what I wanted. Actually, I gave one of them 3.5 stars. Okay, so we'll start with the highest and we'll go to the lowest. So the highest disappointment that I have, and guys, like if you watch this channel, this is gonna be kind of a funny little moment here, is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, because I have been talking since this channel started basically about how I needed to come back and finish reading this book. I finally have done that, and while good, like 3.5 stars, it was good. And I gave it the extra half star because I really do love Wilkie Collins. His authorial voice, his humor, like he has this sort of like underlying irony or sort of snarkiness to his writing that I very much enjoy. And that gave this a little extra something for me. I just felt like this was kind of a little bit all over the place. And this is often pointed to as the first detective novel that was ever written. So I also wonder, and this is going to be a recurring theme in some of the classics we're going to talk about. I'm wondering if sort of what I expect as somebody who reads a lot of mystery, like that is one of my primary genres that I read. I wonder if sort of like the expectations that have built up for a detective type novel in the last almost 200 years since this was published, like 150, 200 years. I wonder if all of those conventions made me impatient with the way that the pacing of this mystery works. I don't know. I kind of tend to think that that might be what the problem is, but it just didn't, the beats that I was expecting, I didn't get. I did like the different point of views in this. I liked the sort of different like media or like narrative vehicles that are chosen throughout this book. And I liked a lot of the characters. Like I didn't have a bad time reading this. I just had built this up so much in my mind because The Woman in White, which is right over there, is one of my all-time favorite books. Like I absolutely adore that book. Yeah, that's like a 5-star read. One of my favorite classics, one of the classics I often recommend if you saw my Where to Start with Classics video. So this one I just don't like anywhere near as much as I liked that one. So I'm wondering if that's why it felt a little anticlimactic, because I've been trying to read it for so long, and then when I did, it was a little bit like womp, womp. But still 3.5 stars, still a good book, just a little bit of a letdown on a like personal level. And then the next one is 3 stars, Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren. Again, this is, I think, a very much a personal taste kind of item because I think this is a perfectly well executed contemporary romance. it was just much more on the angsty side of Christina Lauren. And that's just not really what I go to Christina Lauren for. I like them when they're a little bit more on the rom-com end of things. You guys know I absolutely love The Unhoneymooners, which came out earlier this year. So, you know, it's not like a knock on the book per se. This is just not what I come to Christina Lauren for. So this is like a second chance romance. There's a lot of angst. The book of theirs that this most reminded me of was Roomies, which was also one that I didn't especially enjoy. Like, I thought it was fine, but it just didn't really hit the spot for me. So I would tell you that if you liked Roomies, you'll also probably like Twice in a Blue Moon. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't really align with what I personally like for them. So I ended up giving it 3 stars because it was like fine, but just nothing special to me. And then my last disappointment that I gave 2.5 stars to was Falling for the Highlander by Lindsay Sands. And this is just because, so I love, like, I can't overemphasize how much I love her Highlander series. It is one of my all-time top comfort read type book to get to these days. Like, it's just a warm blanket of just comfort. So I didn't have like a bad time reading this one. There's nothing necessarily that wrong with this one. It's just, these books have a very specific formula. They are followed almost always to a T, which is essentially dumb, hot, brave dude, dumb, hot, kind, plucky heroine, ending up, sometimes they're sort of on a road trip, sometimes they're just sort of thrown together in this castle in the middle of a loch, whatever. They end up having sort of like a marriage of convenience that arises, and then like, they usually end up in this marriage of convenience because they kind of like each other, but they're not like in love yet, but they, you know, they like each other, they're hot for each other, and then by the end, they're like, oh, I actually do love you. And then there's usually like a murder mystery of some kind to solve along the way. So it's combining a lot of things I like. It's just like, very character driven, very like, hot, dumb people having fun together in the Scottish lochs of medieval Europe, basically. And there's murder. So like, that's a lot of things that I like in a historical romance. And they're very campy, I guess, or sort of goofy. And I just like that. All that to say, I really like this formula. This particular entry in the series, this particular iteration of the formula, just didn't have anything a little bit special about it, and they often do. Like, usually there's like something that's like the little extra spice to go on top of the formula that makes it like a little bit better, or at least like a 3-star, and this one just felt like really perfunctory to me. So yes, it gave me all of the like kind of check marks of things that I like out of these books, but there was nothing excellent about the way that any of those check marks were executed. So it just was a little bit of like, this wasn't one of the better ones in the series. But I have read these out of order. This was like, I think the 3rd one in the series. I've already read ahead. Like, I like other ones further along in the series better. We still, I think, have like 4 or 5 of these brothers that still need to get married off. So like, I'm staying tuned. I'm sure that I will have more Scottish loch fun in the future. This just wasn't my particular favorite iteration of it. So now we move on to surprises. Like I said, I didn't have very many disappointing ones this month. So moving on to surprises, all 3 of these books that I have called out as surprises could have been hits, but I just decided to focus on the surprising element of them. So all of these are 4-star books. The first is Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I really enjoyed this, unsurprisingly, because it's Jane Austen and like, your girl loves her some Jane Austen. But this was just really delightful. This is maybe one of the this is probably the funniest Austen I've read. It's my least favorite of the Austens that I've read, and I've read all of them except at this point, Mansfield Park. And I guess I haven't read like Lady Susan or some of the sort of like partial writings. But Mansfield Park is the only like full novel left for me to read. This is my least favorite of them. But that's not saying a lot because I love all of them. Like, they're all really good. And I think the reason I put this as a surprise is that I didn't realize going in that this was such like a meta book. Like, I had kind of heard that as like, oh, this is like Jane Austen's like parody or like take on a gothic romance. But I wasn't expecting how much like authorial intrusion there is on the text to comment on things. And that is something that when done well, I very much enjoy in books. Like, I like that meta commentary kind of piece of it. So I really liked that. The characters in this one, I really like Mr. Tilney. But in general, the characters in this one weren't as like memorable to me as other Austen. So I wonder if that's maybe why it's one of my like least favorite ones, but it was still 4 stars. It was still really good. And yeah, I was just sort of surprised. Like, it's very clear to me, I think I was talking about this in my mid-month wrap-up, that the prose style of this is a little older, and you can tell that Sense and Sensibility is another take at this, basically the same kind of plot, but without the comedic or like gothic elements. So it was just interesting to see like some of the prototypes of characters that I like better that pop up in this one. So anyway, I really enjoyed my time with this. I have been parceling out Jane Austen very judiciously, and I'd been saving up my next Austen for several years. That being said, I wonder if I may just go ahead and polish off her main canon next year with Mansfield Park. I might put that on my TBR. We will see. But anyway, very much enjoyed this. Sticking on the theme of classics that I very much enjoyed, we have Dracula. So I did a read along of this, by the way, and thank you for everyone who participated. I really enjoyed reading all the commentary on the Discord. I have that linked below if you ever want. That's where I'm going to run my read alongs from now on, because I vastly prefer doing Discord over Twitter. Oh my gosh, like night and day. Very much preferred that. So anyway, so I appreciate everybody participating in the read along, and I just really end up liking the book. And I was a little worried I wouldn't, because I've seen when I've mentioned this book before in the past in terms of, oh, this is a book I'm going to read this year. I've seen very mixed reviews or like mixed feedback on it. Some people really liked it. Other people are like, oh, that's one of the worst classics. So I wasn't sure. I very much enjoyed this because I just found it so campy, and it really, like, again, sort of talking about what I was mentioning earlier on the Moonstone, it very much brought to bear for me, and actually, you know, Northanger Abbey is a huge commentary on genre, so maybe that's just my theme of this month with classics, is like thinking about genres. But this was it really is one of the most pointed examples I've ever had of where the original text, sort of like reader response theory, basically, from a literary studies perspective, the text itself has taken on so much additional meaning in the intervening years because so much additional vampire storytelling and mythology has arisen, that it creates a very campy reading experience and a very meta reading experience that I loved. Like, I had so much fun reading this because it just felt so silly, but it was earnest. It was earnest camp. It wasn't like ironic camp. So I just really, like, Jonathan Harker, poor sweet dumb baby. I just loved him, and like especially in the beginning when he's like making his way to Transylvania, and literally every like German peasant he meets when they find out where he's going is like, you know, like sprays him with holy water. One woman literally like grabs a crucifix and like puts it around his neck. And he's just like, derp, derp, and he like is opening up a letter from like your friend, Count Dracula. Like, it just creates a very funny experience for a modern reader. At least that's how I took it. And I actually also really liked how many different sort of like vehicles for storytelling there is in this book. Like, there's, you know, there's diaries, there's letters, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of different points of view, and I think there's a lot more plot in this than I thought there might be. I feel like it moves along at a really nice clip, so I would absolutely add this to my list of like where I think people looking to get into classics could start, because I think since you know so much about the mythology, part of the enjoyment of this is your own knowledge of what happens with this story over time. So anyway, I just really enjoyed this. I really liked the characters. I thought this was a lot of fun. A classic I very much had a good time reading. So thumbs up. If you've not read this yet, I would definitely recommend. And yeah, one of my favorite reading experiences of the year for sure. And then the last surprise I wanted to mention, another 4-star book, was the Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams. Now, this has been a book that I have very much been anticipating since it was announced, because the premise just sounded really fun, which is basically a bunch of dude bros in a romance book club because they're trying to like figure out what the hell is going on with the women in their lives. Like, they can't communicate with them, or like they're trying to understand them. And I just think that that was like a fun idea. It was also set in Nashville, which is where I live, so I liked that piece. And it's just been a very hyped romance. So I was excited about it. And then when I was really sitting down to read it, I was reading the back cover again, and I got a little nervous because this is a marriage in peril trope, which in romance, in any book, we've talked about this. I've discovered this earlier this year. I just really struggle with the topic of divorce in literature. I can't totally explain why. I am not divorced. I've never been cheated on. My parents are not divorced. Like, I don't have any like personal reasons why that I find it such a stressful thing in any form of literature, be it romance, mystery, literary, whatever. It stresses me out. So the fact that the entire tension of this book rested on like the heroine has filed for separation and wants to get divorced, and the hero is trying to win her back, and that's why he's joined this very adorable little book club. It was a stressful premise for me, and one that I very rarely like in a romance. So I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have asked for this as an arc, because I'm not sure if I'm gonna end up liking this purely by virtue of the fact that this is like maybe my least favorite trope in romance. But the strength of the writing and how just charming this entire world and premise and characters were completely won me over. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I honestly think if I liked that underlying trope better, this would have been a 4.5 or a 5-star book. I really think it's a great example of romantic comedy in literature. It's just very fun. And I am absolutely so excited for the next one because it will be tropes that I like a lot better. More of like a hero in pursuit kind of thing, which is one of my favorite tropes. And it's with a hero we met in this book that I really like. But it was just a very cute, charming contemporary romance that I would highly recommend if you think it sounds of interest. It's coming out in November. Very good. Very excited for the next one. And I also liked, the hero is a professional baseball player, but he also has a stutter, which I don't know that I've really seen a lot of in romance novels, and I actually really liked how that was sort of incorporated into the story, and yeah, it was good. So anyway, oh, and also I liked that the whole like part of, well, they have several problems in their romance, but one of the problems is that they like are not having good sex. And part of what the like development between them is like learning to communicate so that they can have better sex. But again, I think that in romance, so often the trope is, and like, it's sort of a genre shorthand of like, oh, like this is the best sex you've ever had. That's part of how you know that this person is the one. It's sort of like a genre convention. So I actually liked that was kind of subverted a little bit. And the whole point was like, you can't just, I mean, maybe sometimes, maybe like some people have like enough chemistry to make like all that stuff just amazing out the gate. But the whole, like, I think I liked that there was some representation of like, no, like good sexual encounters are usually about having good communication. So I thought that was a nice addition to the romance genre in general. So yeah, all in all, I really like this. Okay, so now we come to the hits, which I pared down to 7, but really we're going to group 2 of them. So like really 6, but okay, mostly this is going to be in no particular order. So first of all, The Prize by Julie Garwood. This is definitely my favorite Julie Garwood I've read so far. This is historical romance. And this is the one where I finally get why Julie Garwood is one of the only old school romance writers who is still recommended to contemporary readers, because she was writing in like, so this book I think came out in 1991. She's writing in the sort of transition period between old school tropes and new school tropes. And really a lot of authors, like there's some authors from that period who survive. So like Nora Roberts is a great example. Amanda Quick / Jane Ann Kurtz, I think is her last name. Like there's a few of them that have survived that transition, but it's very clear in this book why Julie Garwood is one of them and why her books from that period still get recommended. Because even though I love Nora Roberts, a lot of her stuff from the 90s, with the exception of like the In Death books and a couple of others, I wouldn't recommend to people because they are very like transitional in their tropes. This is one where you can literally see the author struggling between the fact that she wants to be writing more progressive attitudes towards gender dynamics and sex dynamics, but she is still trying to pay lip service to what were kind of the genre conventions of the 80s, vis-a-vis the hero always has to be right. He, always has to be like awakening the heroine and whatever. So there's a couple of beats like that, but the heroine in this one, Nicola, kicks ass. I loved her. She was so sassy. She was, she had a couple of dumb, too stupid to live moments because again, that was just part of the time. But this was the book where I was like, I want to read more Julie Garwood. She is very much the predecessor to Lindsay Sands, who we were talking about earlier. So like, I have so many more Scottish Loch Highland fun from her. And this is one where I was just like, I get it. I'm into it. I gave this 4 stars. This is definitely my favorite like old romance that I've ever read. And I just enjoy it and would definitely recommend it if you like a historical. So she was so sassy. She like pretended to be a nun to like escape. And then like the hero has like this big scar, and she has this big moment where she's picking her husband and she chooses him. And somebody, you know, basically says like, you want someone who's disfigured? And she's like, what are you talking about? His mark of valor on his face? And I'm just like, serve, Nicola. I can't help but stand. Like, I just loved her. She was great. So anyway, that was for me. I had a great time reading this book. And it was also just like, I love books where I can see genre development moments. Like if you watch this channel, you know that that's a lot of like kind of what I read for, is like how individual genre books like fit within their overall genre. And this was like a great piece of that from like the history of a genre perspective. Taking a very hard turn. I want to mention Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. Oh, guys, this was excellent. This was so good. The only thing that kept me from giving it 4.5 stars is that I think he could have brought all the threads of his book together a little bit better at the end to just like really land the punch and just like bring it home. I don't know if he chose not to do that because he was trying to like still maintain sort of more of a journalistic or like conventional reporting, investigative journalism type posture. I don't know. I wish that he had just like brought everything together at the end to just like button it up and seal it in, and that would have given it a 4.5 star. But this is a fabulous book. It is so good. It is, if you don't know, Ronan Farrow was along with Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, the investigative journalists who really broke the Harvey Weinstein story, and then a number of other like major high profile sexual assault harassment type cases about men in power. And this really is what catalyzed a lot of what we would call the Me Too movement. Like it really sort of brought all those elements together in an explosive way where women, I think, I don't know, it's so interesting in the last few years of like women finally just feeling like they see themselves enough to say like, we've had enough. Like all these conversations that we have with each other around the kitchen table about like our experiences. And I say that, I think much more so for like maybe my generation a little older than women of a previous generation. But, you know, definitely women my age, I think there's very few of us who haven't had like a serious conversation with a friend at some point about like harassment they've experienced, abuse they've suffered, and what they want to do about it. And I think seeing those stories in the media have been very catalyzing and empowering. And I think the whole election cycle of 2016 and just seeing something be so egregiously misogynistic and predatory, and that just being kind of like, well, whatever, all of that together, I think it's just been very explosive. And so the Me Too movement in terms of just this specifically around this kind of sexual abuse piece, Ronan Farrow was a very big part of bringing those stories to light, especially for Harvey Weinstein. And this book is essentially a book about how that investigation came together, which if you watch this channel, you know is one of my favorite tropes in nonfiction. Like All the President's Men is one of my all-time favorite books, and like the story about the story for journalists, I love that. Bad Blood has some of that. Like, that's just like, I love it. So I really enjoyed like all the sort of behind the scenes recounting that he has of what he was doing to bring this story to life. And how in the process of doing that, NBC completely shut down what was amazing, you know, kind of findings that he already had and was ready to go to air with because of essentially realizing their own internal liability, and Harvey Weinstein allegedly kind of, you know, using that as a sort of Damocles for them of like, if you do this, I got shit on you, especially about Matt Lauer. And so seeing that unfold, and then seeing how powerful people will go to like crazy ends to try to shut these stories down, hearing about all of the journalists who came before Ronan Farrow and Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey who were trying to break the story and couldn't get essentially the support that they needed to be able to do that, watching women essentially say enough, and I think having a political moment where women really felt like it was enough and were ready to take really big risks to come forward and tell their stories. It is a very moving, there's passages of this that are certainly very difficult because it is talking about sexual predation and assault, so like warning there, but I think it's handled very respectfully. It's not dwelt upon, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't feel fetishistic about those details, and it's just excellently told. I would also highly recommend the audiobook for this, because Ronan Farrow reads it and you hear him doing imitations of people. The standouts being Woody Allen. His Woody Allen is worth the price of the audiobook, just to be totally honest with you, but he does several others and they are all very enjoyable. So I've also really enjoyed just watching the interviews with Ronan Farrow that have been kind of circulating as he's been doing press for this book. So anyway, highly recommend this. I'm also going to read She Said as a part of Nonfiction November. I'm looking forward to that. I have that audiobook, but I would very much recommend Catch and Kill. It's a bestseller, and I think it totally merits all of the hype that has around it. It's generated a lot of headlines. I think it's generating a good conversation all over again. So definitely recommend that one. That was a big hit for me this month. Let's see here. Oh, One Summer Weekend by Shannon Stacey. I love Shannon Stacey novellas. This was just a really good Friends to Lovers one. So I wanted to mention it as a hit because she just hits the spot for me on a romance novella. I read that one. I also read One Christmas Eve, which they're in like the same little world, same series. So if you're looking for a good Christmas novella, we're coming into that time. So I would recommend that. But One Summer Weekend is just like a really just effective Friends to Lovers story. It really worked for me. Then so I ended up reading and really enjoying Serpent and Dove. Okay, I've seen some mixed reviews on this, and I can understand why, because I don't think that this is like a groundbreaking book. I don't think that this is like an amazing book, but I gave this 4 stars and really enjoyed it because I think that this is a book that very much knows what it is and strives to be a very good version of what it is. And that is, this is a fantasy romance. And I think the romance piece is really fun. I think the fantasy world is very interesting. That being said, I do think that this book has a very interesting element to it because it is clearly not our world. Like, this is a fantasy world with fantasy rules, but it has people speaking French, like the language of French. That is like a thing from our world that is in this one. I mean, I guess you could say that with English, but I think we just sort of assume. I think when I read a book, a fantasy book written in English, I'm just assuming in my head that whatever they're saying is actually in some other language and it's just in English because I read English. No. These like are specifically like, you can tell French speakers. So that's from our world. And then one of the religions is specifically Christianity. I mean, like, it quotes from the Bible, like it is Christianity. So it is basically a situation where there are witches who like have some sort of version of a Wiccan or like goddess-based religion. Like, there's references to sort of like the Bane, the Mother, and the Crone kind of trope. So like there's that is one group, and they basically they've been sort of like run out of their native lands and they're trying to get it back, and they are persecuted, but then they also do horrible things to the other side, which are Christians, and very heavily patriarchal but very recognizably a religion that exists in our world. So I thought that was a very interesting choice to not like, there's no like allegory to Christianity. I think you see that a lot in fantasy books where it's like, clearly this is like ye old fantasy version of Christianity. This is just straight up Christianity. So I think that created some interesting kind of like thematic content in this one. And I thought that was just an interesting choice to not try to allegorize it, but just be like straight up witches, Christians, go at it. I think what's interesting, and I think the point of this book is really that religion, people who become religious zealots, it doesn't matter what the religion is, it makes them behave badly in various different ways, sometimes in the same ways. So I think that it is, Christians don't come off good in this book, but neither do the witches. Like, the witches are doing some fucked up shit. So like, anyway, I thought that added an interesting element to this book. But aside from that, I just really liked the sort of like, this is a marriage of convenience and like very angsty, but it's not like so angsty that I can't enjoy it, because y'all know I can't do too much on the angst. It's just like the right level, and that's why I can do that kind of trope more in a YA book, so it doesn't feel as serious. I will say, I think that this probably should be more fairly characterized as new adult rather than YA, and that is because there is an explicit sex scene in this, and when I say explicit, it's not like his thrusting rod in her glistening cave or whatever. Like, it's not that level, but I mean, they're very specifically, there's a sex scene that is described, and that's not typical for YA. It's usually a little bit more closed door or a little bit more metaphorical if it's discussed. So just know that. But I really enjoyed this. I had a very fun time reading this, and I will absolutely continue in the series. I don't know that the plot beats in here are surprising, but I think that they're well executed. Like I was saying, I think that this book knows what it is and it does a good job of executing on what it is. So I wasn't surprised by where we left things off, but I'm intrigued to see where it keeps going, even if I have some ideas about where it might. I still want to read it and find out for myself. So I've had a lot of people asking me what I thought about this. I really enjoyed this. I think this is one of my favorite YA fantasy releases of the year, to be honest. I feel like this year for me has been a little weak on the YA fantasy releases. This is definitely one of my favorite ones, and I had a very good time reading this. We'll definitely continue. Okay, and speaking of witches, we have next The Witches Are Coming by Lindy West, and I don't know that I need to tell you a lot about this. You probably know who Lindy West is. Her book Shrill was a bestseller and is excellent. I very much enjoyed that one. I don't know that I like this one quite as much as Shrill, but this one is more on the kind of cultural criticism end of things and less on the memoir elements. There are some of those still in there, but this is basically examining our cultural moment since the 2016 election. And I think in this book, I had a real aha moment of realizing how well situated Lindy West's previous, let's say, 5 to 7 years of being online put her to be a commentator on our current moment. Because basically what we're living through now nationally here in the US is troll culture. And that is all Lindy West was experiencing prior, or like that's just been her online experience, is basically dealing with trolls as a woman, as a fat woman, as an outspoken feminist, as an outspoken progressive person, married to a black man. I mean, like, she's very comfortable in how to address trolls. And I think that vantage point gives her the ability to comment on popular culture, on politics, all of that in a really specific way that I thought was very resonant. And this was a book, I wouldn't say any one of the essays particularly stood out to me, but this was a book filled with lines that I highlighted, underlined, will reference if need be, because she does a very good job, I think, of encapsulating specific emotions that I think a lot of us feel in just a very concise way that you're just like, yes, like that's exactly, like when I log on to Twitter and see this kind of tweet, this is what it makes me feel. She's very good at that. And I think this book is filled with those moments. I think if you like her, you're very much going to enjoy this book. If you don't like Lindy West, don't read this book. You're not going to like it. But if you are open to that project, I think this is a very good version of what it is. So I gave it 4 stars. Like I said, I think I probably like Shrill a little bit better, but I still think this is really good and definitely worth seeking out. Very much enjoyed it. And then finally, would it be a 2019 Books Like Woe reading wrap up without some reference to the In Death series? It would not. So my favorite book that I read this month was Echoes in Death. And prior to this one, the other one that I very much enjoyed was Brotherhood in Death, though I also quite liked Apprentice in Death. But this is just I think a really well done mystery plot with a serial killer trope. Basically, like serial killer rapist who has accidentally become a murderer in the course of, you know, a series of breaking into homes and victimizing people. And this was gonna be a 4, but then the ending of this book, I was like, ooh, I liked that, because there were some things set up and I thought I knew where it was going, and it was a slight twist on what I thought it was. I liked that. I really liked the character work in this, and I thought that the pacing of this specific mystery just really hit the spot for me. It's exactly what I liked. I'd heard that the 40s were a drag for the In Death series, and I'm wondering if you are somebody who likes the In Death series more for like the Eve Rourke drama, if you don't like the later books. I personally, that was the part of the books that I had to just like get past. I was like, I'm so sick of this bullshit between them. Like, there's these little petty whatevers. It just felt very boring to me, to be honest. And like, I liked it when they had different types of conflict between them that weren't just like him always being right about things, basically. I didn't like that. And that really phases out sort of in the mid-20s of this series, like early to mid-20s. And then it just becomes much more like them growing in their relationship together. Like, this is going to be a 50-book series in February. And of those 50 books, 47 of them, they have been married. And this is like really an exploration of a romance with married love. And I just don't think in literature so frequently do we just see like lived experiences of people who are married and love each other versus like, usually if the marriage is a major part of the book, there's some sort of like major, like one of them is very frequently, one of them is cheating on each other. And I'm just kind of bored with that. Like, this is a unique, for me, part of what I enjoy about the series is that this is a unique window into an author having to live with characters who like each other for a long time, but still have interesting like conflict that comes up between them. And I like that. So anyway, this book had a lot of moments like that of just like them being in a relationship together long term, like they're, and still like growing and finding out new things about each other and like responding to new situations together. So it had a lot of that stuff, but then it just had really like lovely moments of mysteries. I don't know. This is one of my favorites in the series. Like I said, I also read Brotherhood and Apprentice in Death, and both of those I thought also had very good mysteries to them. And then Brotherhood in Death, I was between a 4 and a 4.5 on that one. It did have some really, like, that was in a long running series. Usually you have books that are sort of like notable books in the series for like moving character arc stuff forward. And I felt like that one had a couple of those moments. But anyway, overall, still very much enjoying the In-Depth series. Guys, I'm almost at the end. I have only 5 books left in the series. I thought that I wasn't going to be able to catch up by the time book 50 comes out next year. And I think I'm going to actually end up catching up with everything except for the novellas by the end of this year. I'm going to catch up with all the novels this year. And then in January, I'm going to catch up on the novellas so that I will be ready and fully caught up by the time book 50 comes out. And I'm both very excited for that and very sad because this has been, especially this fall, this has just been such a lovely comfort binge series experience for me. And I've discovered that I actually quite like the audio. So my thing has been kind of switching between the audio and the books. And that has been a way to, you know, just consume them all the time. Like when I'm out and about shopping or, you know, working on something more routine at work or whatever. So anyway, this is my biggest hit of the month. And I promise, after 2019, you guys are not going to have to hear about the In-Depth series so much, but I do just love it. It's a lot of what I've been reading in the last few months. So there you go. Whew. Okay, guys, I think I've been filming for like 45 minutes, but I had a lot to say about the books that I read in October because it was a very good reading month for me. I had a great time kind of getting back into the groove of things. We've only got a couple months left. I've got some things that I definitely want to get done before the end of the year in terms of reading. And I'm also very excited because we are roughly 6 weeks away from when I cut off my reading for the year in terms of like what I count on my lists. So I'm about to be able to start filming all of my lists for the end of the year. If you guys were here last year, you know, like basically the back half of December is just a bunch of different best and worst of the year lists from me. So I'm very excited about that because it's my favorite time on BookTube. It's my favorite stuff to watch on BookTube and it's my favorite stuff to make. So anyway, side note. Let me know how your October reading went. Did you have any big hits, any big disappointments, etc.? Let me know what you thought about any of the books that I mentioned. And yeah, I think that will do it. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. Hope you guys are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!